Good morning. This is Rose Blackburn, and we'll be starting our presentation in just a minute. I just wanted to check some audio and recording signals, and we'll be right back. Give a few more people a chance to join us. Thank you. Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. So welcome to our webinar. This is the fifth in a series of webinars that we're putting together under the title name of The Art of the Possible. And this week we want to focus primarily on trend analysis so that we can talk about a bit how your projects are doing. How do you know if you're doing better or worse than last month? How do you get that information, and what do you have to do to accomplish that? So today we'll be doing more of some project management principles and focusing on what's the data that you need to get into your system in order to get good information out. With that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. If there are questions, Lori, I'm going to pause here for just a second and make sure that you are on and can hear and there are no issues with the sound or volume.
Nope, it sounds good from this side, so I assume everyone else can hear as well.
Okay. All right. Great, then we're going to go ahead and get started, so let's do that. Just a quick background on QuantumPM, what we do. My name is Rose Blackburn, and I have been with the company since the very beginning. I'm one of the founders of the organization. Our goal as an organization is to simplify the way people work, which gets pretty challenging these days because we have projects, we have things that look like projects, but they're not. We have a lot of operational work to do. Many things going on, many challenges to deal with. So what we try to do is bring the knowledge that we have about Microsoft Project, the Project Online world, as well as the discipline of project management, all the domain knowledge that we can bring together to simplify that situation for you and to help make your organization more productive. We have both the consulting side of our business where we offer that expertise and how to put these systems together, how to do project management discipline. And then we also have some software products that help you get to the data that you need. So I'll be touching on that a little bit during this presentation. The focus is mostly on the discipline, but I'll touch on a couple of places where tools might be helpful to you as well. We have a series of webinars that we have done over the last several years, actually, and all of these webinars are available to you recorded and on our website. So please do reach out and look at any of those that sound interesting to you. We look forward to having you come join us on our website and finding more information. And this one, as I mentioned at the beginning, is the first in a series called The Art of the Possible. So trying to make all this complexity around the tools that come into play a little bit simpler to take care of, to manage those, and to make sure that you're successful in what you do with your projects. It's really not about the tools, it's about you getting your work done. So what we're trying to do with this series is break things down into manageable chunks of work so that you can focus on the things that you need to do, and it all becomes very reasonable and possible for you. So today we're doing this one on trend analysis to understand whether you're doing better or worse, how things are doing over time. And coming up in November, we actually have a bonus seminar after this one, so there'll be 2 in November around process automation and a few other things. So stay tuned for those. Okay, so this one, we're talking about trend analysis. How do you know if you're better or worse? And really what we're looking at here, we will be focusing on the use of the Microsoft Project Online tool as well as Power BI, and also a tool that we use in our own organization called BIAdvantage. We're using all of those to bring the data to presence for you. We're not going to spend a lot of time on the tools, but just know that those are the tools that we're using to make all of this come together for you. What we're really trying to accomplish in this presentation is how do you get to that information? It has to be there in order for us to pull it out and put it into pretty reports. But how do you get to it, and how do you take snapshots? How do you figure out what data is important? What are the things that you need to bring to the forefront so that you can work through them? So, number one, we need to plan ahead to make sure that you have the data that you need and the right amount of data to get your work done. So planning ahead to get those roadblocks out of the way and not end up with charts that look kind of wonky like that one. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, hard to read, hard to understand. That happens for a lot of reasons. The blockers that we're going to focus on today are the things that cause nightmares for project managers or PMOs when you're trying to pull data together. Either you have no data or you don't have the right data. You don't have anything that tells you what happened last month. All of that got overwritten or things changed, so you don't have the data that you need. Another problem that we bumped into, especially with organizations that have hundreds of projects and they get very complicated, things get really hard to understand, they cross multiple year boundaries, you end up with so much data that you're overwhelmed by it and you cannot figure out which pieces of it are important, which pieces of it you can use, and even how to get the right data out so that your reporting engines, whatever it is you use, can actually report on the data. So there's a lot of complexity around that. We're going to talk about that a bit as well. From a project manager perspective, however, I think the one that always bites me and probably bothers a lot of other project managers is scope and the instability of scope. It seems like it's constantly changing. Excuse me, sorry. There's always something going on. Everything you thought was going to happen, changes happen. That's just the nature of projects. If we knew them perfectly at the beginning, we wouldn't really need project managers to manage them. So it's how do you get a handle on scope? How do you manage it so that you're not in a constant churn kind of mode? You can manage the changes that are coming at you, and you can explain them in terms of reports so that when something happens, you've got it clear, it's documented, you know why the costs went up or the productivity didn't happen that month, things that went awry that you weren't expecting to go awry. So we'll talk about that a bit more. And then other things that have come to the forefront more in more recent years are what I'm calling competing methods for purposes of our discussion here. And I'm using an example from a technology perspective. There are a lot of other examples that we can talk about as well. But in the example that I'm talking about here is IT organizations traditionally have approached all projects from a waterfall method, which means you start at the very beginning with what are the requirements for this system that we're going to create. and then go from requirements into a design and then into a coding phase, and very sequential, very much a series of activities that need to happen. So kind of a waterfall in nature. That's one method. But in recent years, we have come to more of a more flexible approach to getting work done in a technology world, an Agile approach. And because of that, it's changed the methodologies we use, and it also has changed how we measure whether we're being successful or not. So that's just one example. We've got lots of other examples, different kinds of organizations. How do you measure a marketing organization versus an IT organization? What are the things you're trying to figure out about the projects you're doing? So we're going to address each one of these in a bit more detail as we go forward here. So for any of these situations, you've got to step back and do the planning that's necessary so that you have the data in your system when someone comes to you and asks what's going on with your project or with the entire portfolio of projects that you're dealing with. So I have tried to boil it down to just the core elements that you're going to have in order to measure your success or measure the trends for your project, for all the projects in your organization, to understand where you started and where you're going. So a baseline is important. We'll take a couple of minutes to walk through how that works, how you set that up. It's not intended to be a trap. It often seems like that then you get locked into what you predicted on day one. But really, it's intended to be, here's where we thought we were going to be, where are we? So you have a basis for comparison. So you've got to have a baseline, and you can have multiple baselines. So think about that in kind of a concept of snapshots. Maybe you do one at the end of each calendar month, or maybe you do one when you complete major phases. Different kinds of ways to look at baselines so that you can capture the data that you need. And that all needs to be planned at the beginning as you're launching your project, so you move it forward properly. Other things that need to happen is that you need to make sure that you have the ability to manage the data that's coming through your system. There's a lot coming at you. Is it being documented when it needs to be documented? Do you have it captured somewhere where you can get to it later? Where does all that information reside? And how do you get to it so that you can get the kind of reporting that you need out of it? You're also going to need a change control process. You have to have a way to manage all of the things that are going to come at you. As a project manager myself, I have never managed a project that didn't change, and change a lot over its time. So what you thought you were starting with and what you ended up with are always very different. And you need to be able to tell the story. And that's what I think change control really is intended to do, is tell the story of what's going on in your project. Here's where you started. Here are the big things that happened as you discovered things along the way. Here are things that happened to you as you went along the way. And you have it all documented so that you can understand when big changes are reflected in your reports, you have a reason for them and you can move forward. The last one is sort of a catch-all around what kind of data you need to capture. And this is tricky because you really have to step back to understand the kind of project that you're working on, or projects, to make sure that you're measuring and capturing the right things. So hours is a very traditional way to measure progress on a project. How many hours of effort have you put into it? How many did you plan? And then you have a way to compare. In an Agile world, that's maybe not such a great method to use because you have people dedicated to you. You know how much time they're going to spend, but how much work did they get done? So then you have to use things more like what's called a backlog, or a list of things that are going to be accomplished. And you can move through that a bit differently then. So you have a list of what you're going to do and then how much of that you accomplished in a time period. A schedule, cost, burn rate is another way of looking at the backlog, or looking at the resources. How many did you use and what did you expect at any particular point in time? Plan versus actual, of course, that's how you compare the things with baselines. And then for people who get to a more sophisticated level of project management, Earned Value is a great tool to use for it as well. So different kinds of methods that you can use depending on what you're doing in your organization, what kind of data you need to collect. But you need to do this at the beginning because you can't capture it later. Once it's gone, and you can't get back to it. Okay, so let's start with baselines. Pretty simple. What you're seeing here is a baseline out of Microsoft Project, the desktop tool, and how you get this accomplished. So I've got the highlight on project, the number 1 item there. You click on that. It brings you to this next menu line where you have the ability to set a baseline. So you click that one, set your baseline, and that gives you the ability to do a variety of things. You have a lot of data that's saved for you immediately as soon as you set that baseline. So it will capture wherever you are at that point in time. So you'll see in this little example here, there's a start date of May the 5th. The baseline captured that same date. And then you have other dates in there for when you plan to finish and when you actually finish. So all those kinds of things will be available to you so you can do the comparisons. I'm going to take a quick break here and see if there are any issues, any questions before I move forward.
So there's no questions right now, and I just want to remind everybody, if you do have a question, just please go ahead and type it in at the bottom of the screen so that we can help you. But nothing at this point, Rose.
Okay, thank you. Please do feel free to type something in so that we can answer whatever questions you have as they come up. All right, so let's talk about the kind of data that needs to go into the system. And I touched on this earlier. Things that you need to really watch for. One of our customers, I like to use customer examples, who does transportation kinds of projects that can be very, very long, sometimes crossing 4 or 5 year boundaries. And they have thousands of these projects going on at any particular point in time. They manage all of that system within Project Online. So it's able to capture all of the data, but there is so much data, it just gets overwhelming. You have to, it's just crazy to look at. There are thousands and thousands of lines of projects, and within each project, many hundreds or thousands of activities that need to be accomplished. So when you have that, you need to winnow it down to what is the important data out of that that's critical. For that particular customer, we did look at methods to do that and came up with a standard set of milestones that were critical to them, so that every project of a certain type would have that kind of milestone in it. Put some things in place to make sure that those things didn't get deleted, so that now we don't have to look at every single piece of trivia in the system, but we do have some standard components of milestones that we can look through. Make sure we baselined all of that, and even so, there's so much data in it, the system, that we couldn't get the reporting to happen as quickly as we needed it to. It would simply take too long to render reports. So when things like that happen, you've got to come up with other methods to do it. The other thing that we also had with that is big systems, very complicated. It's hard to get them updated. So how timely is the data you have? If your data is out of date by a month or more, trending reports are not going to give you a valid kind of picture. So all this stuff has to be in place before you get there. So things that we did to help with that particular customer and others along the way is we pull the data out to a database, in this case BIAdvantage, the tool that we were talking about earlier, and then set up a bunch of different views so that particular reports could hit particular views in order to get to the data that was necessary. And we could render those reports very, very quickly within seconds of the request going in, rather than having to watch the system with the little hourglass churning for great lengths of time. We also had to establish some rigor around the way project management was done in the organization. So you have to put in processes that encourage people to put the data in. You have to make it easy for them to get the data into the system, and easy methods that will help them put in the right data so that every piece of data that you have is also valid. So we put some things in place there to encourage people, little triggers to remind people when specific data was due to be put in place. And those kinds of triggers only went to the individuals who needed to do the updates, so we didn't end up spamming everyone in the organization. Different ways to accomplish that sort of thing. Also some validation on data entry. Making sure there's a baseline in place, making sure that when data is put in, the right data goes in the right places. So a variety of different things that we had to put in place to accomplish that. In this case, it was very automated because it's such a large organization, but there's a lot of this that can be done manually as well. So a lot of things you need to think through as you're setting up your system. Scope management, one of my favorite topics because it never goes away. It's really important to be able to track changes. Again, telling that story that you need to tell about what's happened on your project. Where did you start and where did it go? And it doesn't have to be overly bureaucratic. So I threw in here a very simple change management process where something comes in. You want to have a formal process that says, are we going to do this or not? You don't want things just sneaking into your project. Based on that, you have to adjust your plan. And as you adjust it, those are the places you need to be looking at for what changes do I need to make? What triggers do I have to put into the system to make sure that that change gets well documented so that if there's a blip in my reports, I know what it was about and why it was done. So at that point in time, it's time for us to think about, do we need to re-baseline? Typically not the way you want to go. Usually you want to take some kind of a snapshot to be able to identify those kinds of things. Sometimes it is a start over and you need to do a complete re-baseline, but that's seldom the case. So you may have to just baseline a section of your project. That's a possibility. New features were added. Well, those wouldn't have been in your original baseline anyway, so you need to baseline the new features. Different ways to go about it. It's just all I'm advocating here is that it's a proactive thought process that goes into this so that you're not trying to explain yourself after the fact. You have it documented, you have it managed so that when things happen, and they will happen, you know what to do with them. So change tracking. This is a critical piece in understanding the trends that are going on in your data. I'm using here the example from the tool that we have called BIAdvantage, and data can come into that from a variety of sources. So it's not just a project schedule. I've talked about a schedule a lot here already, but it could come in from a change management form, a document. It could come in from a budgeting system. It could come in from a variety of different places. It doesn't really matter. We collect that data. It has to be collected in order for you to do the kind of trending snapshots and so forth that are appropriate for your system. So as we collect it, then we create various views, figure out what makes sense for what thing, and can produce status reports, can do trending. We can even do triggered notifications based on something just happened. So maybe we hit a milestone and that's something that was a trigger for some notifications to go out. Or maybe something is very much off in the numbers that are coming out. We can put something together for that is a good identifier, gives you a heads up early. So a lot of different ways to do it. So don't think about it in terms of just a project schedule. Think about it in terms of all the systems you have to touch in your organization in order to get a project accomplished. And please, again, stop me anywhere along the way if there are questions. Okay, so competing methods. This is one of my favorites because it's very challenging, keeps people on their toes all of the time in the project management world. So you need to spend a lot of time obtaining some clarity around what is the right way to measure progress on your projects. So it could be that you have a whole program, various projects going on. Some of them may be more critical, may have higher priorities than other projects within those programs. Different kinds of project types may make a difference. And you need to be able to tell the story at the program level as well as at the project level. So how is the program going overall? Maybe you have one or two projects in a very large program that are slow, but you know that you're going to be able to catch those up when something else is accomplished. So not something that's critical, but something that you need to be able to explain because the data is going to show something behind. You need to be able to manage how you're going to catch that up where it's supposed to be. Also looking at different departments. How do you measure success for an organization that has different kinds of projects in it? If you're doing projects for a marketing organization, they tend to be a bit less structured. They tend to have more big deliverable, visible kinds of things. So some kind of way to measure them with more of that kind of a flavor to it is very helpful. So bottom line, it's the trending, the analysis that you do is intended to help you improve the way you do projects over time. So it's not about just that one project. It's about, okay, on this project we learned some things, and for the next project we're going to do it a bit differently. So it does take time. A lot of patience is required to accomplish all of these things. So again, in all of this, it's very important to make sure that you capture the historical data. So the baselines is a great way to do it. Snapshots at various times, those can be new baselines, or they could be just at the end of a month you grab the data and store it somewhere. And also remember multiple sources of data. So this isn't just a project schedule, it could be a lot of other components that are added into it as well. Another theory that we have in our organization, and I think most organizations would like to be able to accomplish, is that you enter data one time and then you are able to use that data anywhere in the system that you want to. So you don't spend your time re-entering data in 6 or 7 different forms. You enter it in one place and then it moves to the system where you need it. That's something that we do with our tools. It's something you can do with tools like Project Online, where you can enter data in a form and it becomes part of your project. You can enter data in SharePoint, that could become part of your project. All those pieces are possibilities. And the point behind all of this is to save you time on the data entry, because data entry is where you make it or break it in terms of trending. You have to have the data in the system, and it has to be good data in order for you to be able to do trend analysis. I know I'm preaching a lot there, but now we'll move into some of the trending reports and move forward with what kinds of things can you get out of a system and how do you make that all work. So I'm going to take a quick break here before we switch gears into what trending looks like. Any questions on the kind of data or how you get the data into the system?
No questions at this point.
Okay. All right, so here's a very traditional kind of trend analysis report. These are called SCurves. And the theory behind an S-curve is that it gives you that kind of S shape to it because you start slow, you tend to get a lot more done in the middle, and then it slows down over time. You'll see in each one of these, there's 3 different things that it's tracking, but they're slightly different, so I wanted to share a couple of them with you. The one on the left-hand side is a traditional S-curve, plan versus actual. So you have what you planned, you have that projected over time, and then you have an actual line, and you may have a variance line as well. Different kinds of things that you can look at to see what's going on. And I've got several more examples of those as we go through this process. So different ways to look at the data so that you know what was planned, you know where you are actually, and where you expect to be over time. The one on the right-hand side I found to be interesting because it allows you to put together a forecast of what you're going to have to do in order to catch up to where you expect it to be. This may or may not be possible, but it's a good exercise to go through to understand, okay, in the actual picture there, you can see in month 7, we're quite a ways off of what was to be completed by that point in time. So how are we going to make that time up? What are we going to do to accomplish it? There's got to be a big story behind this in order to make that happen. It's not just hoping that you'll be able to make up time on the end. There has to be an actual story behind it to say what we're going to do in month 8 and month 9 are these kinds of things to get us up to here, and then in month 10 we'll do the next thing. So again, a story behind those pictures will be very helpful. Wanted to spend just a little bit of time on earned value. This is a discipline that is very rigorous. It takes quite a bit to accomplish it and put it in place. There are things within Microsoft Project to allow you to do this fairly automatically and get some good basic data. But the essence of it is that you're looking for what the planned value is for your project, and you can see that as the red line on the left-hand side grid. Then it's also measuring your cost, how you're spending your money, and your schedule. So as you're spending money, how much work are you actually getting done? You can spend a lot of money and not get anything accomplished. You can spend little money and get more accomplished, which is kind of what this picture is showing you on this left-hand side. Over time, there's quite a bit of in the early months here, there's a lot of work that got accomplished, but the cost was lower. We don't know exactly why that is, so again, there's a story behind this. Are the costs behind because you're learning how to be more efficient and you're getting things accomplished with less? Or is it because you don't have the staff that you needed to get the work accomplished, and therefore you're not spending the money that was planned for? Different reasons can be reflected in the same chart. So again, lots of stories behind all of that. So what you're looking for at the end, of course, is to be perfect. I've never managed to accomplish that on any of my projects, but I suppose it is possible. But what you're looking to accomplish there is that the schedule is completed, you've gotten all of the work done, so everything is done, and your cost comes in as you expected it would. It usually goes, there's a lot of up and down in here in between things, and it being able to explain what's going on and why comes from all those other things that we've talked about earlier. So you can tell that through your baselines, you can tell it through your change control logs, and various other ways to explain why things are either ahead of schedule or behind schedule, over cost, under cost. Make sure that you're in good shape. Okay, so switching gears a little bit and back into an Agile world. This is a different way to measure when you're not doing a standard waterfall kind of project. You have a bunch of work that needs to be accomplished. We know how much work there is, but how much is going to get done in any particular day or sprint in an agile kind of mindset, we don't know that. And over time, what you're trying to do is learn how much you can get done in a typical set of time. So this is a burn down chart that just tells us that by the end of this 3-week period, 21 days, we expect to have this much work done. The amount of work that's shown here in terms of effort, and also the number of tasks that are going to be completed in that time. So it's one version of it. Lots of other versions of how you do this. And these I find to be kind of interesting because they help you understand a bit more about your agile work and the way that things can trend over time. So here's a burn up model rather than a burn down, how many things are being accomplished in a particular amount of time. And on the right hand side, you see the scoreboard, the story scoreboard. It has a variety of interesting things in it. It's telling you things like velocity, which is a term that's used in agile technologies to get a flavor for how many components can be done in any particular sprint cycle. So if a sprint is 1 week, how many things get done? Maybe you set them for 2 weeks. It doesn't matter. The idea is that you get a pattern set so that you can predict your future a bit better. So that's what the trending is about. So we have, in this particular example, a velocity of 6, which means we're going to get 6 of these stories accomplished in any particular iteration that we're going through. And we have a total of 20. So that should give us a pretty good prediction of how long it's going to take us to accomplish that. Of course, it takes a lot of time to get to that point. So all this historical data is going to improve over time, and you need to keep going at it and keep the patience in place to accomplish all of it and make sure that you get it done. So with that, what I thought we would do from here is potentially switch gears into a demo of some of the kinds of reports and things that might be available to you. So I'll be changing and moving into Project Online and showing you a few things out of Power BI and out of our BIAdvantage tool to see what it really looks like in a real system. So the BIAdvantage tool is behind the scenes. You won't see it anywhere. It's just integrating all the data from a variety of different sources into the Project Online view or into the Power BI view. And with that, I'm going to switch out of the demo mode for now, or switch out of the PowerPoint mode and go into demo mode. So if you'll give me just a moment to get that in place, I'll be right back. And Lori, if we have any questions, this would be a great time for that.
Yeah, if you have any questions or want any clarifications on anything, just go ahead and type in your questions and we'll get to the answers. Thanks.
Okay. All right, I'm going to share my desktop once again here. All right, so just a quick view. This is Project Online, and many of you have been to our demos, so this is probably fairly familiar territory for you. I'll just do a quick presentation of what's here. At the top, there's a timeline. These are all standard capabilities in Microsoft Project Online. Down in this section down here, you'll see all of the projects that are going on in your organization. Left-hand side is some navigation tools for you. So let's just take a peek at different ways that you can look at the data. All of this is very important because as you have different kinds of projects, you may have different types of data that you need to associate with them. So I've switched into a view by project type. just so you can see some different things. And in this particular kind of project, this is a type we're calling enterprise project. These are projects that we're measuring a project health indicator, a return on investment indicator, and a few things like that. So different kinds of projects will have different flavors to them. You can see in that enterprise part there weren't very many that had a lot of data around them. But in a finance project, this return on investment piece is critical. So there's going to be a lot more data associated with that, a lot more information that's necessary there. I'm going to move over now into Power BI so that you can see some of the capabilities of tools that will pull all of this data, so that it's pulling it straight from that Project Online instance, bringing it into our Power BI setup. We're also pulling in data from other places to bring you a dashboard that gives you some kind of a flavor for things that are going on. Some of this is trending data, some of it is just where we are at this particular point in time. So you just need to be comfortable with what kinds of things need to happen, and how your projects are reflected against that. So I'm going to work into, clicked on that dashboard pie chart, and it brought me into another screen here that shows project status. And I can organize this data in a lot of different ways. Now this data isn't necessarily doing trending data either at this particular point. This is a point in time kind of view, and we'll get to some other ones in a minute. But what I can do here is isolate data by organization, so that I only see the things that are appropriate for that particular organization. And I may have different reports based on the kind of organization it is. So different ways to look at all of that data as it comes through for you. Other things that tend to have more of a trending type nature to them. I'll pull you into some of the financial data that might be in the system. So here's a cost versus actual over time. Interesting kinds of things. You know that there's a story behind this when you see this big downturn in this particular area, what was going on there, and then a huge burn rate at that point. So a lot of data, there's got to be a lot of information behind it in order for you to be able to tell that story. So different ways to do that is what's critical for it. Here you can see just data over time, how that portfolio of data is working. So different ways to look at things within the system. And pretty much anything that you can imagine, you can create a method for coming up with that data and putting it together. So that's the essence of what we wanted to talk about today. I'm going to switch back now to our to the PowerPoint slides and just close there with that information. Hopefully it was interesting to you. You found some things that were useful in your organization, and please try to use them. And if you have any questions or need any assistance with it, we are available to help you with that. So I thank you very much for your time. I'm going to pause and see if there are any questions you have. I'm happy to go back and look at some things or talk in more detail about them. Lori, any questions for us?
It doesn't look like it, Rose.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. I will stay on the line for just a little bit longer, and if you do have anything, please let me know. And if not, hopefully it was 100% perfectly clear, and that's why there are no questions. Thank you all very much for attending.
Thanks, Rose.